Hey everybody, this is Perch. What do I'm going to try and land this video. It may not, but I'll put it up anyway because I mean, fuck quality of content. Am I right? It's good when you get an F bomb right out the beginning. I think this is a question that all of you hopefully are asking yourselves as consumers, as people paying for a product. Once upon a time, and I understand inflation and everything else, and I think it's been overblown a little bit because it was reasonable for me to go to a grocery store with $5 in my hand and then pick up, you know, 6, 7 comics. I mean, I remember when comics went to 75 cents an issue, and that felt like a big deal. Like that was like that like it I was like, wow, comics are getting expensive. I remember that moment. And even then, like it was reasonable that you could go and you could do I don't know, like jobs, like dumb jobs for people. You could mow somebody's lawn, or you could take their garbage out, or you can even, like, believe it or not, once upon a time, kids who were like younger than 10 would wander around the city unattended, collecting like aluminum cans and putting them in a trash bag, and then would go take the aluminum cans down to some recycling plant. And then you'd get like, $2.50 out of it. And then you'd like do that a few times and you could get yourself like $5 doing some of these kind of random weird jobs as a child. And then you could go to a grocery store or a gas station and you could put your $5 down. You could walk away with like, 6, 7 comics. That was reasonable. And I remember even, and maybe this was like an indicator of where life was going to go. I remember going to a bookshop and I convinced the bookshop that I would unload the box of comics and put them on the rack and get them organized and do that. And if I did that for them, I did this job that they would give me 2 comics for doing this job for free. It was like I was off the books. I would organize the thing, which would take like a half an hour, and I loved it because, quite frankly, like a lot of you would, I would take the comics and I read them as I was putting them all up. So yes, I read all the comics, and then I'd get 2 comics. I'd walk away with it. But there, once upon a time, comics felt like that. Today, comics at 390, sorry, 395 or 485 a pop. Today, comics don't feel like that at all. Like if you're buying like 5 comics, you're paying $25. So for kind of an example, um, $25 for 5 comic books, which really is what you'd be paying if you're lucky. If there's no kind of anniversary issues, double size issues, tax not getting you. I mean that feels more substantial. $25 for 5 books in 2024 feels significantly different than $5 for 5 books, back in the 80s. And yet that's kind of where things are at. And to make matters worse, the storytelling in the 80s, while not great. So I mean, one of the big misnomers that I think I hear a lot on the internet is like, "Oh, if only comics were like the 90s, things would be amazing." Well, look, I mean, I as an X-Men reader, and I'll use that just as an example, I think a lot of people have pretty loose memories of what went on in the 90s. There were good comics, sure, but like if you look at the totality of the X-Men run in the 90s, there was some dog shit issues during that time period. There was some good comics, no doubt about it. I think you had Joe Mad doing some pretty amazing X-Men issues during that period, but you had just nonsense. I mean, you had like thorough nonsense during that era. Um, and yet, um, it was still, even then, your comics were like $1.25, starting to become $2, still felt expensive. But you put up with a lot more nonsense when you're paying those kinds of prices. The challenge now is that at $5 a pop for a comic book, it's hard to put up that kind of nonsense. It's just difficult. And I remember very vividly because I was in the, I mean, he's used this analogy a lot of times, and I've argued with him about it both in person, or sorry, not in person. I've argued about it in mail like a lot. Joe Quesada would say things like, comic books are a great value. But the challenge is, I agree with that statement when the comic book is great, when it's good. When you are going back to that comic book and you're seeing kind of individual panels that are drawn really, really well. Like, for all of you listening right now, think about it for a moment. I'll bet all of you have a comic book, or hopefully, more than one, but you have a comic book that you could visualize if you close your eyes, that is special to you, that you have read like a billion times. I've put several of them on this channel. The most, one of the ones that comes to mind immediately is that X-Men annual that I reviewed a few months ago, which was a standalone X-Men issue with the Wolverine going, into the crystal for this random alien we've never seen before, and all the rest. I think about that issue a lot, and I think about individual panels, and I think about Alan Davis drawing Dazzler kind of, struggling with herself and ultimately choosing to become unknown and homeless. And I think about that panel where Wolverine is kind of rising up from the crystal in kind of a spiritual form. Like, there's a lot of stuff in there of the smile on Storm's face as her and Yukio are going off into the Tokyo streets. I think about that. I think about the Paul Neary, the Alpha Flight X-Men as Guardian issues. Certainly, Art Adams on some of those long shot issues. I think about panels. And so if I think about one of those issues, like that X-Men annual, for example, which I believe was a double-sized annual priced at, I want to say, $1.50. By all means, I co-sign that statement from Joe Quesada that is an amazing value. $1.50 for memories that I've held for, like, 30 years, more than that, right? 40 years. Like, Christ, I'm old. Anyway, I think about that issue a lot. And so $1.50 for those kinds of memories, fuck yeah, sign me up all day long. So I think even, $5, $10, $20, that would be a bargain for that issue. At the time, if somebody would have said this is $20 for his Alan Davis issues, I mean, I would have been like, get the fuck out of here. But in hindsight, that is value. The challenge is today, right now, even for comics I love, and there are several comics out there I do love. I mentioned it before on this channel many, many times. The Ghost Machine stuff I think is great. If you're not reading that, like, there's some great issues in there. I just think that's in my mind, in terms of a publisher and a brand, they have by far the greatest allotment of talent to books. I mean, that lineup is fire. But so I think about, what's going on there. Like Gary Frank, Jeff Johns Geiger issues, they're wonderful. And what's funny is those stories that they're telling in Ghost Machine, a lot of them are, I want to say this in a nice way, they're familiar plots. Like, it's not like a lot of that stuff is breaking complete new ground. They're just doing familiar ground really, really well. And so I feel like those issues are, are a bargain, or at least I don't feel cheated when I put my money down and I get that issue in my hands. I feel like it's more or less good. The problem is there's very few comics that feel that way. And so if I'm asking you to do that same thing for DC, and I'm asking you to be really, really critical, like I have a really aggressive bar, which comic of the last 3 years, and I'm not talking about just a good comic where you buy it and you're like, yeah, it's okay. I feel okay about it. This is great. I'm talking about a comic you're going to remember 20, 30 years from now, where you're going to remember the individual panels and how they were drawn. You're going to remember the story. You're going to, think about all the different ways it could have gone. Again, I go back to that X-Men annual. Hopefully most of you saw that video. And I think about kind of the different areas that story could have went. Like, what if they ran that same story today with the current X-Men lineup? What if, Cable and Bishop had been there? How would that have gone? Like just different, what would Rogue and Gambit have been like? At that time, Gambit wasn't in the picture. Rogue was. What would that have looked? How would that have changed the whole thing? Like, it's given me such food for thought. There's not a lot of comics out today that do that. The decompressed storytelling, the kind of the way that comics are written right now, they're not written to invoke those kinds of memories, those kinds of moments. So, again, to Casada's statement of comic books are an amazing value, I think the exact quote, or it's not the exact quote. I'm paraphrasing. It's the comics are a better value for the money than video games. It's something along those lines is what he had said. The problem is that video games have been stuck at $50, $60. Forget about microtransactions for a second. They've been stuck at that for a while. If you were buying God of War, you were paying 40, $50 for it on the God of War 1, like the real God of War 1, not the PS5 God of War. If today it's 50 to $60 for these issues. There's been very little inflation over the course of the last 20 years or so. There have been some, but not much. Comics, meanwhile, when comic books were $1.50 and you were, getting, 40 of them for the price of one video game, I think it was a more reasonable argument that those comics and the memories they would invoke would be a better value for your money than a video game. Today, at $5 a crack for comics, even if I'm being very generous and I'm saying a $60 video game, you're talking about 12 books. That's not even half of the Ten of Swords series. Like the Ten of Swords miniseries, that wouldn't even get you half of that event. If you're talking about whatever the recent Blood Hunt event, you could buy that Blood Hunt event and like 3 issues of the tie-ins for the same cost as a video game. I'm sorry, at that point, there's no way comics are the same value as a movie ticket. Or I mean, look, you go to in many cases, a lot of theaters, because they're hard up for people, $10 will get you a movie ticket for 3 hours of a movie. You're honestly telling me that 2 comics are equivalent to that? They're not. I love comics to death. Obviously, you know that if you're listening to this channel, I love them, but that's just not where comics are at right now. So I do think there's a price problem, sure, but there's also just a memory of value problem with these books. That's my question to you, and I'm hoping you'll help me out in the comments. When was the last time you read a comic story that gave you such memories that you'll remember it, 30 years from now? There's not many. But if you go back 30 years ago, there were a lot more. And that, to me, that's the core problem that we have. So anyway, it's not to dump on modern comics, but it is a, if the storytelling are invoking less memories and the price has gone up, that's a double whammy, if you will, for comics. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. What are your memories? And thanks for listening.